Hi everyone, I'm Celine from Calla Patterns and welcome to a video tutorial for the Clematis Wristlet. Even though this is a really old pattern, I've never made a video for it. It was a free pattern that I released many years ago. It is still free, but I did decide that it was time to revise it. Because it was one of my first patterns. It still had photos instead of diagrams, and now I stick to diagrams. And I decided to take this opportunity to just make a couple of changes to it. So one of the changes that I did was I don't have a zipper tab now at both ends of the zipper. I just have it at the closed end of the zipper. So that allows it to open a little bit wider, and it's also going to be a little bit easier to top stitch. And then another change I made was I just specified the seam allowance for the darts because I do get a lot of questions about that. And I just made another option for the wrist strap. It is still a 1-inch wrist strap, but the D-ring is now 1/2 an inch, not 3/4 of an inch. The swivel is still 1 inch. And I just did a combination of webbing with a decorative strip of fabric, but really you can do whatever you want for the wrist strap. There's about a million video tutorials on different ways to make a wrist strap, so you can go ahead and use whatever method you prefer. However, I am going to be making kits to make the clematis, and they will include what you need to make a wrist strap that looks like this. So first what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over what you need to make the wristlet. Now, if you have purchased a clematis kit from me, then it's going to include all of this. So you don't need to really worry about it, but I'm just going to go over what your kit should include and what you'll need if you don't have a kit. So if you have downloaded the clematis pattern in the past, the pattern pieces themselves have not changed, so you do not need to go ahead and reprint those if you don't want to. The only thing that has changed, I've just made the materials list a little bit more precise. So in terms of the exterior materials, so you're going to need a cotton fabric. I mean, if you want to make the whole thing in either cork or vinyl, you can go ahead and do that. You just wouldn't interface any of the exterior pieces. But in my kit, I'm doing a combination of either cork or vinyl with a fabric print. So the amount of vinyl that you're going to need is a piece that is 12 inches wide by 8 inches high. I might have included a little bit extra if you've purchased a kit from me. So no big deal if it's not exactly 12 inches by 8 inches. You might have a little bit extra. For your exterior fabric, so in this video, it's this beautiful Allison Glass butterfly print. You should have a piece that is 14 inches wide by 11 inches high. Again, if you purchase a kit from me, I've likely included a little extra. So you really don't need a lot of fabric for this wristlet. For the lining fabric, you just need a fat quarter. So in this video, this is going to be my lining fabric, and it's another Allison Glass that coordinates with the butterflies. In terms of interfacing, you're going to need 1/3 of a yard of fusible woven interfacing. So this is the interfacing that I sell on my website, so it is extra wide. That's why you only need 1/3 of a yard. If you're using a different interfacing that is perhaps only 20 inches wide, then you're going to need more. So this is assuming that you're using an extra wide interfacing. So if you're buying a kit from me, again, it might have a little extra. And then you're going to need a piece of fusible fleece. You need the same amount as you need of exterior fabric because the fleece is only going to be applied to the exterior fabric. So this cotton fabric that you're seeing is the only pieces that need fusible fleece. Again, if you purchased a kit, the piece might be slightly larger. In terms of notions, you're going to need 9 inches of zipper tape with a single pull. Now, if you're using a ready-made zipper, you should have, again, you should just have a 9-inch zipper, and you may need to trim it down. But I think the majority of people now are not using ready-made zippers. So in this pattern, we're just going with zipper tape. So you need 9 inches, and it could be a number 5 or a number 3 zipper. It does not matter. You can use either width of zipper. It doesn't change anything at all. In terms of hardware, I showed that previously. You need a 1/2-inch D-ring and a 1-inch swivel. And then you're going to need a 15-inch long piece of 1-inch wide webbing. Now, if you're using this, so this is a nylon webbing, you can heat seal it very easily with a lighter, with a flame, and it will not fray anymore at all. If you're using a cotton webbing, this is different. It does fray like crazy. So for that, you're going to want to apply some fray check or something that will prevent it from fraying. Make sure you let it dry really well before you start using it. And then if you purchased a kit from me, I've added a little handmade label. We're going to go through where I install it. You can install it wherever you like. Everyone likes to place these labels in a different location on their bags, but I'll show you where I like to place mine. I like to place it right here. As I said previously, the pattern pieces for this new version, they have not changed at all. I've maybe cleaned up a little bit the wording and everything, but other than that, they are exactly the same. So they are all cut on the fold pieces, except for the interior pocket. Sorry, not this. The slip pocket. So that one is the only one that is not cut on the fold. If you're like me and you do not like cutting on the fold, print 2 copies of all the pattern pieces except for the slip pocket. I accidentally printed a second copy here, but I'm not going to need that. So I like to print out 2 copies of all of the cut on the fold pieces, and then I cut one at the fold line. I'll do that right here so you can see. Now, the reason why I don't automatically make them not cut on the fold is because it does involve printing more pages, and some of you are very conscious of not wasting too much paper. So I leave it up to you. You can either print 1 copy and cut on the fold, or you can do like what I'm about to do, print 2 copies and then tape them together at the fold line. And then I just cut out the second half. So I'm going to do that for the remainder of the pattern pieces. Okay, so now that all of my pattern pieces are ready, we can start cutting out our fabric. Okay, so in this version of the pattern, I've included a cutting chart at the top of page 3. So we're going to cut out our pieces following the order in the cutting chart. Okay, so the first thing we're going to cut out is our exterior top. And so we are going to cut out 2 of these from our exterior fabric. As you see, gave a lot of extra in the kit. It actually, since there's some butterflies here, it allows me to do a little bit of fussy cutting to make sure that I have some nice butterflies in my pieces. Just make sure that you don't cut in a way where you don't have enough fabric. Okay, so there is 1 piece. And 2. So you can see there's still quite a bit of fabric left here. 2 pieces. We're going to set those aside. Just going to tidy this up. And actually, there's enough here that if I want to, I can use this for my slip pocket. So I might do that. So in this sample here, my slip pocket is done with the lining fabric because that's what I intended. But if you bought a kit from me, it's likely going to contain this extra piece, and you can go ahead and just use that if you'd like for your interior slip pockets. Now, the other piece that we're going to need to cut with this is our D-ring strap piece. So I should still be able to do this and cut out a D-ring strap piece. So it's a very small piece. It's only 1 inch wide by 2.5 inches high. Just place this like this. Make sure I have enough. Yes. 2.5 inches. Okay, so that's going to be our little D-ring strap piece. So I am going to cut this out of here, but I'll do that later since I said I was going to do it in order. Now, with the exterior top, we also need to cut out 2 pieces of fusible woven interfacing and 2 of our fusible fleece. So to make this quicker, I'm going to cut both pieces at once. So you'll see I have this folded in half with the glue sides facing one another. Now, normally I have a pattern weight that I use for cutting. I don't have it right now. So another option you could do instead of doing it in multiple steps like this is to cut out all of your fabric pieces and then place them so the wrong side is on the glue side of your interfacing, and then use a pressing cloth and just press all of them all at once and then cut them out. So you can do whichever way you prefer. Okay, so there's 2 pieces of fusible woven interfacing. And the last thing we need from that pattern piece, I'm going to tidy this, is our fusible fleece. So fusible fleece is especially annoying to cut on the fold, which is another good reason to do this, what I've done here. So again, lots extra. Okay, and now we've cut out all of the pieces, so there's 2 here. We've cut out all the pieces that we needed from this exterior top pattern piece. So that one is done. I'm going to place all of the pieces in a nice pile with the pattern piece on top. Okay. The next thing is the exterior bottom. So you're going to cut this out of cork or vinyl. So if you purchased a kit from me, it could have either one. So there's two options for this. You can draw the pattern shape of the pattern piece on the wrong side of the vinyl and then cut it out. Or you could just do like me and just place it directly on there. Okay, so one piece is done. So I'm not adding any sort of interfacing to this vinyl. I just, for a small bag like this, I find it doesn't need it at all. If you like to do that, you can go ahead. It is tricky to sometimes fuse interfacing to vinyl. It can melt if it melts at low temperatures. So I'm not going to risk it for a small bag like this. There we go. Two pieces of vinyl. I'm going to lay the pattern piece on top and set those aside. And you're going to need to also cut the zipper tab. So this zipper tab here at the end, we're going to need to cut that from here. And that needs to be 1 inch wide by 1.5 inches high. So I'm just going to cut that over here. Okay, so that's done. Now you could have also cut the D-ring strap out of the vinyl if you wanted to, instead of using fabric. If you do decide to do that, because there should be enough in the piece if you purchased a kit, you can go ahead and use that, but just don't add any interfacing to it. So you would cut it the exact same dimensions, but no interfacing at all. Okay, so now we're going to cut out our lining piece. And as I mentioned, we're using this piece. So be a little bit more careful when you're cutting, because we need enough of this fabric left over to be able to also cut out our accent strip for the wrist strap here. So be a bit more careful when you're cutting this one out. I'm going to actually fold it this way so I can cut out 2 at a time. So there is enough of this fabric provided so that you can also cut out your slip pocket out of this fabric if you wish. But I decided I'm going to use the rest of my exterior fabric so that I have a pocket that is of a contrasting color and pattern. I'm going to use this giant paperweight to hold this down. So if your lining fabric is a directional print, then you wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing right now, which is fold it down and cut 2 at a time. So play it by ear depending on what kind of print is on your fabric. So if it's a directional print, you don't want to do this. You want to cut them 1 at a time, making sure that your print is facing the right direction. I try to use a tossed or non-directional print for the lining fabric. Okay. All right, so I have 2 of these. And I missed a couple of spots. Okay. So 2 of these, going to set that aside. And then from the same pattern piece, we are going to cut out 2 fusible woven interfacing. I'm not going to set this too far aside because we're going to need it again. So I'm going to take this. I'm going to place this right here. Okay, so now these pieces for this pattern piece are cut out, so we're just going to stack them, place the pattern piece on top, and then set them aside. Now while I have this, I am going to take my D-ring strap and I'm going to use it to cut out a piece of matching fusible woven interfacing, and then I'll be done with that. So this is the D-ring strap. I'll show you on the bag. It's this little piece right here. Okay, so that's ready. We'll set it aside. Okay, and the last thing is the slip pocket piece. And I'm going to, so this is a directional print. I'm not going to fold it and cut two at a time. I'm going to do each one separately so that my print is facing the right way. Okay, so these are done, and all we need in addition to this is the fusible woven interfacing pieces. Like this. I'm going to cut two at a time. Okay, so these pieces are, again, just a little spot. Stack these with the pattern piece on top and set them aside. Okay, so the last thing we need is the wrist strap accent. So we're going to cut that out of our lining fabric. So I'm going to cut along this longer edge here, and I need a piece that is 1 3/4 inches high by 17 inches. So my bottom edge isn't perfectly straight. So I'm going to cut it a little bit bigger and then I'll trim it. And then I'll trim down the length to 17 inches. Okay, so it is a bit longer than the wrist strap piece because we're going to fold it over the sealed edges here. Okay, so that's that. And I want a matching piece of fusible woven interfacing for this piece. So I'm going to cut that from here. Okay, so now we're going to fuse the interfacing to the wrong side of all of our matching fabric pieces. And then once you've done that, you're just going to have to do an extra bit of interfacing for the exterior top pieces. So once the woven interfacing is fused to the wrong side, then you're going to fuse the fleece over top of that fusible woven interfacing. Now, when I am fusing fleece, I lower my temperature of my iron a little bit and I don't use steam. And I do like to use a wooden clapper. So I will press it and then I will use my wooden clapper to cool it off very quickly. And I find it helps to set my fusible fleece really nicely. So Okay, so our pieces are all interfaced. Now we're going to start sewing. First thing we're going to do is prepare our D-ring strap. So you're going to need your little D-ring. Okay, so that's my D-ring using a little rainbow D-ring. And this is my D-ring strap piece. So now normally I would say to press in this next part, but this piece is so tiny, it's really hard to press and not burn your fingers. So you're just going to draw a line through the center on the wrong side, and then we're going to go over to the machine and we're going to fold it so that this outer edge meets the center line, and we're going to sew it in place as we do that. And then once it's sewn on both sides, so we're going to do this on both sides like this, and then once that's done, then you can give it a press. Okay, so now you're going to fold in one half, and so that outer edge is at the center line, and then you're going to sew along this folded edge with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And when you get to the end, you can stop and rotate. I kind of sewed off the edge here. Go in one, lift up, and then you just fold in the other half in towards that center. Okay, so that's what it should look like, and then you can go ahead and give this a press if you like. And then you're going to take your D-ring and you're going to slip the strap through the D-ring. Now you want the side with the raw edges at the middle, you want that to be hidden inside. So then you're going to fold that in half. So it looks like this. And then you're just going to baste those ends together. Okay, and then we can set that aside for now. So now you're going to take your wrist strap accent piece, and we're going to draw a line through the center on the wrong side. Now it doesn't have to be exactly in the middle, and you'll see why when we're sewing it. It doesn't have to be that precise, but it is, the line would be 7/8 of an inch from either longer edge. Okay, and then we're going to press each half of the strap piece in towards the center line, wrong sides together. Okay, so once you've pressed in both halves on the wrong side, I just like to flip it over and give it another press on the right side. Okay, so now once that's done, you're going to take your webbing piece for your wrist strap, and you're going to place this over top, and you'll see it's a bit longer at each end. That's what we want. You want to try and give yourself an equal amount of extra accent piece at each end of the webbing. And then you can use pins or clips. I'm going to use clips. You're going to place this over top and try to make sure that it's centered. So it's nice to have a little bit of the webbing showing up on either side. If you want to have more of the webbing show up, or be visible, I should say, you can make this accent strip a little bit thinner, so not as wide, and then you'll see more of the webbing. So I'm going to put clips, but that's just to hold it in place to get it to the machine. I'm probably going to remove them and adjust the position of the accent piece as I'm sewing this in place, just because sometimes the fabric can move. I've used a pen that has leaked ink all over. Okay. And then when we get to the other end, you're going to fold that over. So the reason why is just because I find it makes the melted ends of the webbing look a little bit nicer if it's wrapped in fabric. Just a personal preference for me. Okay, so now we're going to sew the fabric to the webbing piece. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that my bobbin color matches the webbing and that my top thread color matches my accent fabric. So when I start sewing this on, I'm going to actually start by sewing across one end because I don't want my accent strip fabric to move at all. So I'm going to start by doing that. Now, when I'm sewing, I'm staying on the accent fabric. I'm never sewing on the webbing. And I'm using approximately 1/8 of an inch seam allowance from the outer edges of the fabric strip. I recommend that you keep your needle in the down position because then when you're rotating corners, it'll make it nice sharp corners and it stops the layers from shifting as you're making adjustments. When I'm not sewing for a video tutorial, I'm not going to lie, I very rarely use clips or pins because I always like to be able to adjust the position of certain things as I'm sewing. Now when you get to the other end, go right up to where you started sewing, and then I'm just going to do some back stitching. Okay, so now that the wrist strap is ready with the accent fabric on it, we're going to need that and our 1-inch swivel. And you're going to take one end of the wrist strap and pass it through the ring of the swivel, and then fold it over about 1 inch or so. A little bit less, a little bit more, won't make that much of a difference. And then take the other end of the wrist strap piece and place that like this so that they are overlapped about 1 inch. And make sure that your wrist strap isn't twisted. You want a nice loop like this. And then just use a clip to hold all these layers in place. And then we're going to go over to the machine and sew these together. You're going to do a little square box of stitching. Make sure So when I'm doing this box, I'm trying to follow my stitching that I used to sew the accent fabric to the webbing. Now, if you're comfortable with rivets, you can go ahead and add a rivet here anyways, if you like. The wrist strap is done. We can set that aside for now. Next thing you're going to need are one exterior top piece and then one of our exterior bottom pieces. And we need to start by marking centers. So you're going to fold that in half. I'm going to use a fabric pen. Okay, so fold that in half, right sides together, and mark the bottom center. While we're at it, let's just mark the top. So you're doing that on the wrong side. Look like this. Mark there, mark there. And then for this piece, we only need a mark along the top edge on the wrong side. Okay. And then we're going to place those right sides together with those center marks aligned. So you can see the center marks here are aligned, and put a clip there. And then we're going to clip the rest. So I like to do it with the exterior top facing up so that we can follow the curve as we're clipping. Do that along both sides. I messed up here. When you're clipping curves together, it's always better to use more rather than less clips. Okay, so now we're going to, so there's a bit of a curve here, that's what you want. You're going to start at one end, backstitch, so all the way across, and then backstitch when you get to the other end. Okay, so this seam was done at a regular seam allowance of 3/8 of an inch. Okay, so now we have to clip into the seam allowance because we have a curve here, and when we top stitch, we want that seam allowance to sit nice and flat. So the only way to do that is by clipping into the seam allowance. Make sure that you do not cut into the stitches. Instead of just clipping like this, you can also cut notches if you want, which is the little triangles like this. I find just clipping into it does the trick just fine. So you want to do that the entire way. This might look easier to see if I do it on the vinyl side. So I'm not clipping anywhere near the stitching here. Okay, and because we're using vinyl, we cannot press before we top stitch. So we're just going to finger press and top stitch at the same time. I'll show you how I do that at the machine. Now, when you're top stitching, I like to use a slightly longer seam allowance, especially when it comes to sewing with vinyl. I'm using the Janome Ultra Glide foot, so it's also known as a Teflon foot. If you don't have one, but you have a walking foot, I would suggest that you use that when you're top stitching vinyl because it can be a little sticky. And you can top stitch at a seam allowance that you prefer. I'm probably going to do a 1/4 inch here away from where the vinyl joins the fabric. So now that I've got one exterior panel finished, I'm going to repeat exactly the same steps to sew the second set. Okay, before we continue, now's the time to add our little metal label. So I'm going to pick whichever one I like the best for the front. I think I'll use this one. And then you can decide where you want to put your label, and we're going to use the the washer to decide the placement and to mark the location of the prongs. So the two outside holes, that's where we want to make a mark. So first we want to determine where the center is. So we're going to fold that in half. And so this is a pen that the ink will disappear with heat. So make sure you're using something similar. Okay, so you probably can't see it, but I have a little mark now where I have my center. And I also want it to be straight. Now the distance, that's up to you. I think for this one, it's quite close to the, yeah, so it's about 7/8 of an inch from the edge here of the vinyl. If you want to do a similar placement, I'm going to do, oh, my center mark's disappearing very quickly. So I'm going to do center mark right here. Okay, and then I want that to be even on both sides as well. Okay, so I'm going to place my washer like this. Okay, put that down. And then I mark the location of my prongs. This one is not working very well. I think I need a different pen. Can I see them? I can see them. Okay, so now for the next part, you're going to want a very sharp seam ripper. I don't know if mine is going to be sharp. And you're also going to want some fray check. Took me a minute. So you're going to want some fray check. So when you're cutting out these holes, you don't want to just put it in and rip. You're going to insert the pointy end at the top of the mark you made and then poke it out through the bottom. So that way there you know you're only going to be ripping that small portion for the prong. The second mark is very difficult to see. I'm going to put that back because I don't feel like making a mistake. There, that's better. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing. Insert at the top of the mark and come through to the bottom of the mark. And then just rip out that tiny portion. So now you're going to add your fray check, just a drop on each cut. This. And then take the label out. Make sure that they are pulled out all the way, like this. Wow, these are really stubborn. Guess it's better that the prongs are strong than weak, right? Okay, so make sure your word is facing the right side up. Nothing worse than installing your label and it's upside down. That would be upsetting. Now, because this is a iridescent rainbow label, I'm going to put a piece of tape because I don't want the rainbow finish to get scratched while I'm sewing the rest of this. So I'm just going to cover that with tape to protect it. Okay, so now flip this over, and then you're going to place your washer so that your prongs are inside the washer, and then I fold them in. And then I'm going to add another piece of tape to cover those prongs so they don't damage the lining of my bag. Like that. Okay, so it's not as shiny and pretty because it has Scotch tape on it, but I do want it to stay protected. So that's that. Now we can set these aside for just a bit. So now we're going to start by sewing our slip pocket pieces together. So you're going to take both of them and you're going to place them right sides facing one another. And you can use pins or clips to hold them together. I don't seem to have pins, so I'm going to use clips. So we're going to sew these together all the way around, but we're going to leave an opening along one edge to turn it right sides out. So you can either do it along this straight edge or this top straight edge. It's up to you. I'm going to show you a little trick on how to get it so that where you're the opening, because you're going to have to sew it shut. I'm going to show you a little trick to get nice crisp folded edges, and then it helps you just make sure that you're closing it up so that it gives you a nice straight edge. So I'm going to show you a little trick for that at the machine. So you're going to start sewing. I'm going to leave the opening here along the top, same as the diagrams in the pattern. I'm going to start here. I'm going to backstitch. I'm going to go to the corner, leave your needle in the down position, then sew all the way around. When you come to this corner here, you're going to stop and rotate, and you're going to sew a little bit in, then you're going to backstitch again, and then you're going to sew from that backstitching to this backstitching, but you're going to use a very large basting stitch. I'm going to go all the way to the maximum and use the basting stitch of 6. And then make sure you're using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way around. Okay, so I mentioned I was going to show you a little trick on how to close an opening really nicely. So what we're going to do is you're going to open where you have that little length of basting stitches, and you're going to press that seam open like this, and then also on the other side like this. And then what that's going to do is it's going to give you some nice folded edges, so you know how to line those up, and then when you're sewing shut, you just make sure the folded edges are aligned. Okay, now we have to trim some seam allowance here before we turn this right side out. So you're not going to trim here where we just folded, but you are going to trim at the corners because we want nice sharp corners at the top of our pocket. Okay, so now we're going to remove the basting stitches. Okay, and then we're going to turn the pocket right side out. Now you're going to need something to poke out the corners. Don't use anything really sharp. I always use this chopstick when I remember to bring it. And just make sure that all of your seams are out all the way. Okay, and then we used our trick here, so we're just going to make sure that our folded edges at the top here line up like this. And press all that pocket nice and flat. And do it on both sides. Okay. And now what we're going to do is we're going to just top stitch the top edge of the pocket here, and at the same time it's going to close up that opening that we have for turning the pocket right side out. So we're just top stitching along this top straight edge, and I'm going to back stitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, so now our slip pocket is ready. We're going to sew it to one of our lining pieces. So you'll take one of these and then you'll place it. So I don't have a specific measurement, but you'll want to sew not too close to the top. So I have it about 1¼ inches here at the center. And then also you want to make sure that you have some room here so that the pocket is not too close to your darts. So when you're sewing the pocket in place, you're going to start at one of the top corners. You're going to backstitch a few times, and then you're going to go all the way around and until you get to the other top corner here and backstitch again a few times, and use a seam allowance of approximately 1/8 of an inch. Okay, you're going to need your zipper and some fabric glue and your zipper tab. So the end of your zipper, the closed end of your zipper. So my zipper's opening this way, so that's the closed end. You're going to need the zipper tab piece, and before I don't like to just sew it on. I like to glue it, let that glue dry a little bit, and then sew it. So that's a bit better. So just spread a thin layer of glue to the wrong side of my zipper tab, and then I'm going to put that and wrap it around the end of my zipper. Pull that over, and I want to give it a few minutes to dry, so I'm just going to add some clips to hold that in place. Now I'll try to get it so that it's folded perfectly in half so that those edges meet. Glue on my hands. Okay, so I'm going to give that a chance to dry a little bit. So while that's drying, we're going to move ahead a little bit. So I want the opening of my zipper, I want the zipper tape to curve outwards, because we can't just sew it with these ends like this. The zipper pull will come off. I'm going to show you on the completed bag here. So if you can see here, the zipper tape curves down into the seam allowance, and then my zipper pull can't come off. So that's what we need to do next. So I'm going to make a mark at the top and the bottom, about 1/2 inch from the end of the zipper here. I'm going to make a mark on both sides. I did not pick the best zipper to show this step, but you're going to have a mark on both sides here, top and bottom, about 1/2 inch from the end. And then you're going to open up the zipper past those marks that you just made. And then what you're going to do is you're going to pinch the zipper at that mark so that the zipper curves outwards like this. And then you're bringing that pinch of zipper tape up towards the coil so that it's at the coil, and then you're going to baste this in place. I'm going to do that at the machine while I still hold this in place. Then I'm going to do the same thing for the other side. So this is what it looks like when you're done, and I backstitch a couple of times just to hold that in place. That's the back. There's the thread here. Okay, and I'm going to do the same for this side. Okay, so both ends are curved out, and you want them to sort of be curved out at exactly the same spot on the top and the bottom here on both sides of the coil, like this. So now you're going to take one of your lining pieces, and we're going to place the zipper along the top edge here. Oh wait, first let's sew our zipper tab in place. while I have that. So hopefully the glue has had a chance to dry. I'm just going to sew it in place along this edge here where the raw edges of the vinyl piece. I'm just going to sew that with a little bit less than 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so hopefully you can see that. And then I'm just going to trim the excess so that it's exactly the same width as the zipper tape. You actually don't have to trim it if you don't want to, because it's going to be in the seam allowance and it's not going to show that it's slightly wider than your zipper tape, but there you go. Okay, so now we can attach it to the lining piece. And if you want to be really, really precise, you're going to fold that in half and you're going to mark the center of your zipper here along both sides. Now I cannot see a mark on this zipper tape, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a pin. There we go. And this will be easy to do the center mark. Okay, so I'm going to actually do all of my center marks at once. So we're going to fold this in half and mark the center at the top on the right side and do the same for the other lining piece. Okay, and then for these, I want to do the opposite. And I just want the center on the, oh, actually we did it before, earlier. There we go. I knew what I was doing. Okay, so center marks at the top on the wrong side for the exterior pieces. Okay, so now we're going back and getting our lining piece, and I'm going to line up the pin with that center mark, and I'm going to use clips. Now your pull could be to the left, to the right, it doesn't matter. What's going to matter is your preference, whatever your personal preference is for the way you want your zipper to open. So for this, in this one here, I made it open where the wrist strap is attached so that I could use the wrist strap as something to hold on to open it. But really, it doesn't matter all that much. It's personal preference where you want it to open. Okay, so it is a bit of a curved edge. And then, so your goal here is to have approximately the same amount of space here in front of the zipper as you do behind the zipper. Now we're going to baste the zipper to the lining piece with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. It's just a quick basting stitch to hold it in place before we add on the exterior piece. Okay, so now that we have the zipper basted to the lining piece, we're going to take one of the assembled exteriors and we're going to place that over top so that it is right sides together. And this time we're going to sew together all the way across with 1/4 inch seam allowance. And you're sewing, you're not just basting. Make sure that you backstitch at the beginning and the end. Now you're going to want to move your pull out of the way while you're sewing because you'll have trouble getting your 1/4 inch seam allowance if you leave it there. Again, always leave your needle in the down position. Okay, so now that they are sewn to the zipper, both the lining and the exterior, you're going to flip them so they are wrong sides together, and we are going to press them away from the zipper. So when we're pressing here, we've used vinyl for this zipper end. You must absolutely not get your iron near there, nor this part, the bottom piece. So you want to make sure that you're staying far away from that. And if it makes you too nervous, you can just press from the lining side, but I'm going to go ahead and give it a try. This, and then press again from the lining side. Again, be careful here. Do not top stitch just yet. First, we're going to attach the other lining piece and the other exterior piece, and then we're going to top stitch both of them all at once. So we're doing exactly the same as we just did, and we are first basting the zipper to the lining piece, and then we're going to sew the exterior to the zipper and the lining. So first thing is a basting stitch. Then you're going to take the remaining exterior piece and you're going to clip all those 3 layers together. So your lining, your exterior, and your zipper layers. And again, you're going to do like the first time around, and you're going to sew all the layers together with 1/4 inch seam allowance. And you're going to backstitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, so you're going to do the same thing, and you're going to press those away from your zipper. Got some threads here, like this. So we don't have as much zipper to hold on to this time, so it's going to be a little bit trickier. So now you can see the benefit of not having a zipper tab at the opening here, because we can fully open the zipper, and it just makes pressing and top stitching so much easier this way. Okay, so again I'm pressing, but I'm staying far away from that zipper tab at the end. And don't worry if you're too nervous about pressing, because we're going to pull those layers away from the zipper when we're top stitching. So don't worry about it too much if you're really nervous about doing this part. Okay, that's all I'm going to be doing. Okay, so now we're going to go over to the machine and top stitch. And we're going to do it all at once. So we're going to start at this end, we're going to back stitch, and then we're going to top stitch here. And then once we get to the bottom edge here of the zipper tab, we're going to sew across to the other panels. And then we're going to top stitch here, and then when we get to the end of the zipper, we're going to back stitch. So you don't want to top stitch here, 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 and here. Okay? So it's like a giant V that we're doing. And when we're doing this, we're going to be kind of pulling on the lining in the exterior as we tug on the zipper, just to make sure that when we're top stitching, we're pulling all of those pieces away from the zipper. Now, the whole time we're doing this, I'm going to recommend that you keep your needle in the down position. Okay, so now we're rotating and we're going to sew across the bottom folded edge of the zipper tab. And then we rotate again, and now we're top stitching here. Okay, so now before we do our final assembly, we're going to sew our darts. So the way you're going to do that is the two straight edges of your darts. You're going to place those together and then use a clip pin. Well, I would use clips because you have vinyl here. And then it was a little bit of confusion about this, so I sew these with 1/4 inch seam allowance. But once I get to the end here, I kind of sew in like a slight curve to the edge here when I get in, and I make sure that I backstitch at the beginning and the end. So 1/4 inch seam allowance here and curve in a little bit here. I'll sew them together and then I'll show you what the stitching looks like. So that's what it looks like. 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then I curve in a little bit when I get here, like that. And then you're going to go ahead and do that for all of the remaining darts. Okay, all of our darts are sewn. So now we're very close to being done. You're going to open your zipper all the way. And now we're going to clip the lining together, and you want those dart seams to be aligned. So first I usually start with the darts. So I definitely like to make sure that my dart seams are aligned because it does look much nicer in the final product if they are aligned. And then after the 4 dart seams are clipped together, I align these seams here where the exterior and the lining pieces are attached. And I have my seam allowances pointing towards the lining. Not sure really if there's a huge difference in which way you do this, but that's how I do it. And once those are done, you can clip everything all the way around. Now to turn the bag, we're going to leave an opening at the bottom here of the lining. So there are a couple of things that we're going to do here. We are going to leave the opening along the bottom. We're going to use the same method as we used for the slip pocket, where we at the beginning and the end of the opening, we're going to backstitch, and then we're going to do a very long basting stitch, and we're going to press it open and all of that. Now, one thing that I've just realized that is super important is to sew in our D-ring. So before I continue doing this could have been a disaster. So you're going to add your D-ring, and where you want to add that, that's up to you. I like to add it where I'm going to be opening the bag, so I'm going to do it right here, and I'm going to do it about 1/2 inch down from this seam right here. Just going to baste it in place with 1/2 inch of the strap sticking out. Okay, here we go. It's a good thing I noticed this because I would have been very upset had I finished and realized that I did not have a D-ring strap, because then it would have just been a pouch and not a wristlet. Okay, so clip my dart seams back together. Okay, now for the exterior pieces, one thing that's important when we're clipping is to make sure that the top edges of the bottom pieces, the vinyl pieces, we want those top edges to be aligned along the sides as well. It does look nice if they don't meet, so I'm going to show you on my bag. So dart seams aligned, and then we want the tops of the vinyl pieces here to be aligned as well. It can be a little bit tricky to get everything lined up the first time you make one of these, but if you're not sure, just go slowly. And a lot of clips or pins, that's really going to help you. Okay, so that is done, and I'm just going to do a couple of clips along the bottom edges of the vinyl here. Okay, and then we're going to sew together. So again, we're going to start here, you're going to backstitch, and then for the lining pieces, use a slightly larger seam allowance than 3/8 of an inch. So try to sew with about 1/2 inch seam allowance. So you're going to start here, backstitch, and then sew all the way along this side. So once you get to the top edge here, you're going to want to slowly switch to a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then sew the two exterior shells together. And then once you get past the seam here, you're going to go back and increase your seam allowance to 1/2 inch again, and then backstitch here, and then do a very long basting stitch from that backstitching to that backstitching. Okay, and again, leave your needle in the down position when you're doing this. Okay, so I started with 1/2 inch seam allowance, and I'm backstitching to start. Now, when you remove your clip, make sure you're holding down so your layers don't shift. You want those dart seams to stay aligned. Okay, so I'm getting close to the top here, and I want to slowly change to a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now I'm going to maintain the 3/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way around. And now I'm at the edges here. I want these vinyl edges to stay aligned here, and the dart seams to stay aligned. Okay, so at the D-ring, I'm going to sew twice. So I'm going to backstitch there. Why? Because there's going to be, all the weight is going to be on that tiny little tab. So you want to make sure that it's really well caught in that seam. Okay, so now we're past that seam and we're getting into the lining. We're going to increase again to 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, and then we're at the straight edge. We're going to sew a bit, and then we're going to backstitch. Okay, now I'm going to increase my stitch length to 6, and base stitch to the other backstitching. Okay, so now we're doing that same trick we did with the slip pocket. We're going to open that seam allowance where we have the basting stitches. We're going to press it open. And all we're doing here is we're just creating a fold at the edge where we want to sew them together. Okay, that's that. Now we're going to remove those basting stitches. Okay, be careful not to cut your fabric here. Okay, And then before we turn it around, we got to trim our seam allowance. So don't trim where we just had those basting stitches. You're going to trim everywhere else though. And I do not do a lot of trimming where I have my D-ring tab. And I'm very careful here at the ends not to trim too short. I'm also not going to trim that because I've had the seams come apart there on me before. So I'm not going to trim there. Again, not trimming there. And I don't want to trim where my D-ring tab is. And again, you got to stop where your opening is. You don't want to trim that. You want that seam allowance because it's going to make it easier for you to sew the opening shut. Okay, now we can turn our bag right side out. I'm going to take all that thread out from my basting stitches. We are very nearly done. Okay. So I just reach in and I grab the bottom and pull that out first. Okay, and then what we want to do next is we want to close up that opening. So thanks to the folded edges, it's going to be easy for us to do this. And just line up the folded edges and clip them together. So you have two options here. You can either sew this opening shut with your machine, which I'm going to do, or you can sew them shut by hand. It's up to you. And when you're sewing, you start just a bit past where you had the back stitching and back stitch again, and then you want to sew really close to the edges, just enough so that you catch both of the folded edges together, and then extend past the basting stitches a bit and back stitch again. And then when that's done, your wristlet is going to be finished. So I'm just going to sew that opening shut. Okay, so I've sewn that bottom edge shut. Now I'm going to tuck that inside the bag. Now when we took in that 1/2 inch seam allowance for the lining pieces as opposed to 3/8 of an inch, what that does is it allows the lining to fit nicely without bunching. So you don't want a lining that is bigger than your exterior. Okay, and then there's our completed bag. And I'm just going to peel off my tape off of my label.